Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Hezbollah fires a barrage of 170 rockets towards northern Israel, targeting several military sites. This after 3 Hezbollah commanders were killed in an Israeli strike yesterday. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un hails his country's ties with Russia, says the two nations are invincible comrades in arms. Kim's comments come amid reports of Russian President Vladimir Putin's plan to visit Pyongyang. South Korea's main opposition leader has been indicted for allegedly transferring funds to North Korea and facilitating a visit to Pyongyang when he was a provincial governor. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu vows to press on with economic reforms despite mounting hardships. Since coming to power, Tinubu has removed a decades-old petrol subsidy and devalued the nation's currency, sending inflation soaring to a 3-decade high. And war-ravaged South Sudan holds its first ever FIFA World Cup qualifier match after inaugurating the Juba National Stadium in the nation's capital. FIFA President Gianni Infantino was present in Juba for the inauguration. Hello and welcome. We start with South Africa, where the country's political future is hanging in limbo. The African National Congress lost its majority for the first time in 30 years in the May 29th general election. However, it still remains the largest party and will control 159 of the 400 seats in the new parliament. Ever since the historic polls, the ANC has been drawing up plans and negotiating with potential partners to form a government. Now, as the date approaches to convene the country's parliament, there is no clear sight of who will take charge as South Africa's next leader. The Office of the Chief Justice has said that the newly elected parliament will meet on Friday. The first meeting will take place at a convention centre in Cape Town. Chief Justice Raymond Zondo will oversee the swearing-in of the newly elected or re-elected members of the National Assembly. Following this, he will preside over the election of the Chamber's Speaker. And finally, Zondo will preside over the election of the country's president by the lawmakers. Last week, ANC's Cyril Ramaphosa said that the party favoured forming a national unity government. He called on other political parties to form an alliance.
We have therefore agreed that we will invite political parties to form a government of national unity as the best option to move our country forward. The modalities of the government of national unity will take into account the conditions prevailing at this moment in our country's history. The purpose of the government of national unity must be first and foremost to tackle the pressing issues that South Africans want to be addressed.
But the proposal was met with a cool reception by some. The economic freedom fighters initially even dismissed the idea of joining hands with the Democratic Alliance.
Going to form part of any government with the Democratic Alliance. We're not going to sit alongside the Democratic Alliance and Freedom Front Plus in government as the economic freedom fighters. And we are not desperate for positions in government.
But over the weekend, the DA held internal discussions to decide a way forward. Business leaders and financial markets would favour a deal between the ANC and the DA. But that is a widely unpopular choice among ANC supporters. That's because many regard the DA as a defender of white privilege. Meanwhile, an alliance with the EFF would be more popular with parts of the ANC base, but that may not sit well with the financial markets. Investors have expressed concerns about the EFF's policies, such as nationalising banks and mines. And Jacob Zuma's MK party is a further complicating factor. MK had earlier said it would not back an ANC-led government if Ramaphosa remained at the helm. But the ANC plans to keep him. And now, Zuma's MK party is even trying to block Friday's meeting. The party has filed an application claiming that last month's elections were rigged. Despite outperforming in the polls, the party says it was marred by fraud. Under South Africa's constitution, the parliament must convene no more than 14 days after the declaration of election results, and a leader must be elected by a majority of the lawmakers. If the National Assembly fails to agree on a new president, the Chief Justice can order lawmakers to adjourn for no more than 7 days and then resume voting. And if they still can't choose a leader within 90 days of reconvening, fresh elections must be held. Now, as parties continue to reject one another, South Africa's fate has been left hanging in the balance, and that makes it further uncertain whether any kind of deal will be reached by Friday. Now, for more on this, we have with us Professor Andre Durban, a political analyst and research professor at Northwest University. He is joining us live from Potchefstroom, South Africa. Hello to you, Professor. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon, Alyson. Nice talking to you and to the viewers.
Now, Professor, what are the implications of the ANC's significant electoral decline on the political landscape, and how might this affect the party's strategy during these negotiations on forming a government of national unity?
Well, if we look at the support base, when the ANC took over government in 1994, they received 65%. They pick it up in 2004 to 69.7%, and then gradually it went down to 57.5%, and then the most recent election just over 40%. So that is a severe decline. And to refer to it as the country is in limbo, I believe is an accurate assessment of the situation. At this point, the ANC with 40% can basically negotiate on two lines. Towards the center right, we have the Democratic Alliance, the IFP, and some smaller parties. And then to the center left, it seems only to be the EFF and the MK party. But we must take into consideration that the EFF is not very cooperative with the ANC, although may be popular in certain circles, and currently the MK party is not accepting the Constitution of South Africa. They are not accepting the results of the election, and they would like to get rid of President Ramaphosa. So this is basically leaving the ANC leadership with the choice of the Democratic Alliance and the IFP. And as you have mentioned, this is not very popular in certain circles. Now, what I am expecting to happen, we will have the constituting of the Parliament, the 7th Parliament of South Africa on Friday. The Chief Judge will basically elect or select the Speaker, and then the Speaker will take the procedure forward to go and initiate bringing all the members of Parliament and legitimate them, and then they need to elect the President of the country. Now, at this time, it is going to be very difficult because there's a lot of negotiations behind the scenes. The parties are not communicating, and there are indications that the EFF is going to put their own candidate as president, and then also we have the MK party boycotting the whole process.
Yeah. Right. And Professor, how are the opposition parties, particularly the Democratic Alliance and the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, positioning themselves in these current talks, and what impact could this have on the formation of a government?
Well, the reality is, with the leading party only having 40% of the support, they need a strong and reliant partner or partners. And at the moment, I think they follow the strategy of what they call a government for national unity. And old President Ramaphosa opened up the conversations saying they are prepared to talk to anyone. So my understanding was that there were talks between the ANC and several parties, but it seems as if the most conversations going the way of the Democratic Alliance, and there are rumors behind the scenes that there may be some sort of an agreement, a tentative agreement between the Democratic Alliance, the IFP, and the ANC. Now, this can be extremely problematic for President Ramaphosa because this is not fully accepted within his party. And the problems are, amongst others, that there are individuals within his group that is not accepting the connection with the DA. COSATU is against it, and so also the SACP as a political party. There are also problems with regard to the positioning of individuals like the deputy president of the ANC, Paul Mashatile. But at this point, the EFF is out. The MK is boycotting the process. So the DA and the IFP is still around. And if President Ramaphosa will be elected, I think it will have been done with the support of these two parties and probably a number of smaller parties.
And with the ANC's proposal for this national unity government, and as you've explained, these deep rifts among the parties, what are the chances of reaching a consensus, and what could be the role of smaller parties in this process?
Well, in 1994, before 1994, we had a very, very difficult situation where two parties, the old National Party and the ANC, was in a struggle involved for decades, came together at Kudesa and they negotiated a settlement ending up in the new democratic constitution. So it is not impossible that parties can find each other. And it's interesting that President Ramaphosa recently said that despite the coalition talks, there are also another forum for talks, the so-called national dialogue, where different interest groups, not only political groupings, but also groupings from the economic sector, civil society, and others can participate in discussing a future for South Africa. What is absolutely clear is that this was a watershed election for South Africa. And now we need to plan for the future of South Africa, and we can only do this through negotiations. And I believe this is not necessarily a weak position to be in. This is an opportunity to make a big difference to South Africa's future and the future of all its citizens. But what is important is that we have players that are constructively playing the political game and the game of negotiations, not the type of strategies we have seen from parties like the Umkhonto we Sizwe party and to a certain extent the Economic Freedom Front. So I think this is an opportunity. Small parties and small interest groups can play a role. They can really make a difference in this regard. And this is what we call in the political science punctuated equilibrium. It's an opportunity. It's the result of a tipping point. And now we can come together. We can negotiate to a certain extent new settlements to take the country forward on a very difficult road where we have major political, economic and social challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Professor, for being with us on Firstpost Africa and, as always, your valued insights.
Thank you very much.
Malawi is marking 21 days of mourning after a plane crash killed the country's vice president along with 9 others. The mortal remains of Vice President Klaus Chilima have been brought back to the capital Lilongwe. People in the southern African nation have been disturbed by the tragedy.
I am devastated because of this tragedy. We all are mourning because as the vice president, he was helping us in many ways. He was there when we needed him. Now we have lost. It's heartbreaking.
Now, the military plane carrying the vice president disappeared on Monday. The other passengers included members of Chilima's staff and security, as well as Malawi's former First Lady, Sanil Dzembri. Now, the aircraft was headed to the Mzuzu International Airport, around 380 kilometers away from the capital. However, the aviation authorities directed the plane to turn around due to poor weather. It was then that the plane went off the radar. Then an intense search and rescue operation was ordered to locate the missing plane in the mountainous forests of the northern parts of Malawi. The plane wreck was found in the area on Tuesday with no signs of life.
And rescue team has found the aircraft near a hill in the Chikangawa forest, and they have found it completely destroyed with no survivors, as all passengers on board were killed on impact. Words cannot describe how heartbreaking this is, and I can only imagine how much pain and anguish you all must be feeling at this time.
Authorities swung into action as soon as the plane went missing. Both regional and national agencies were involved. The Malawian government also reached out to neighboring nations and countries like the US, the UK, Norway and Israel. Rescuers had to face challenges of extreme weather conditions. However, many have criticized the government for their slow response. Many Malawians are also not happy with the way the search and rescue was handled by the government.
Our country is going nowhere. I don't see us progress in any way if things are handled like this. Government needed to have moved fast to search for the plane, even within the same hour it got lost on the radar. These people are prominent. A plane is not like a small bird. It can't just vanish like that.
Vice President Chilima was just back from South Korea on Sunday after attending the Korea-Africa Summit. Before the fateful tragedy, he was headed to attend the funeral of a former cabinet minister. The 51-year-old was seen as a potential candidate in next year's presidential election. Malawi now mourns the loss of its vice president in a year that has already seen the loss of world leaders like Iran's president due to plane crashes. Now, our next story uncovers the details of the plight of African students and migrants in Russia as Vladimir Putin's war against Ukraine rages on. Africans are increasingly becoming collateral. According to a report by Bloomberg, Russia is forcing African students and migrant workers to join the Russian armed forces. Moscow has threatened not to renew their visas if they refuse to do so. Now, these African students and workers who migrate to other countries in pursuit of a better future are effectively left with two jarring choices. Either return back to their own country, where there are likely fewer opportunities, or agree to fight against Ukraine, which may eventually result in their death. The report, citing European officials, said that some African workers have even been threatened with deportation if they did not agree. Meanwhile, others have resorted to bribing Russian officials to stay out of the conflict. Now, Russia's practice of sending migrants to battle is not new. It dates back to much earlier in the war. In fact, these troops suffer especially high casualty rates because they are increasingly deployed in risky offensive maneuvers, and that's to shield the more highly trained units for important escalations. 2 years into the war, both Russia and Ukraine are suffering high casualties in their armed forces, and this has forced Moscow to enlist migrants and convicts from its prisons to fuel its war efforts. As Russia's prison population plunges to a historic low, the country is conducting a recruitment drive to enlist foreign mercenaries. Now, these army recruitment campaigns, conducted across nearly 21 countries, include several African nations. According to Britain's Ministry of Defence, there has been a recent uptick in Russian recruitment activities targeting Central African nations, including Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, and Uganda. They offer lucrative incentives, including a $2,000 registration bonus, a $2,200 monthly salary, and some have also been promised a Russian passport. Recruiters have also targeted migrants and students who previously looked for employment in Russia, and in some cases, people were roped into the scheme on promises of better work opportunities before they were forced to deploy to the front lines. Now, there are currently 35 to 37,000 African students in Russia, and according to a government agency, about 6,500 African students go to study in Russia for free. But now these students have become Russia's newest tool to advance its regional agenda. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid news headlines of coups and crises in Africa, many positive stories from the continent often get overlooked, but not on this show. Our story today is from the Tunisian island of Durban. In the face of environmental challenges and historical upheaval, the Ibadi Muslim community is leveraging artificial intelligence to preserve its century-old manuscripts by digitizing fragile texts and using AI to decipher ancient scripts. Now, the community is not only safeguarding its heritage, but also reclaiming its cultural legacy from obscurity. Our last report gets you all the details.
Today's era is marked by rapid technological progress, and artificial intelligence is spearheading it. People are using it in every way they can, from businesses to using it as a companion for loneliness. The dependency and usage of AI is on the rise. Communities worldwide are using modern tools to preserve their cultural and historical legacies. One of them is the Ibadi Muslim community on the Tunisian island of Durban. They are using artificial intelligence to protect their centuries-old manuscripts. This mission has been started by a 74-year-old librarian. Saeed Al-Barouni has taken on the mammoth task of protecting his community's relatively unknown heritage. Barouni took over his family's library in the 1960s. The collection is almost 6 generations old, And he has been working tirelessly to preserve as many Ibadi manuscripts as possible.
My grandfather and my father are graduates of Zitona and were passionate about this heritage and took on the responsibilities of Sheikh and Imam. They preserved the collection. We then took up the torch and made them available to researchers across all universities, both in Tunisia and abroad.
Because ancient Arabic cursive is difficult for modern readers to interpret, Baruni has started using Zinki, an AI software that reads and simplifies ancient manuscripts. Feras Ben Abid, a London-based Tunisian software engineer who created Zinki, believes the tool makes it possible to access numerous manuscripts that would otherwise be indecipherable. It also helps to correct misunderstandings about certain topics, such as Ibadi heritage. The library houses over 1,600 ancient Ibadi texts and books. The material is on a variety of subjects, including astrology and medicines. Some of the work dates back to 1375 AD.
Around 1,200 pages of manuscripts were digitized. We formed around 5 teams to correct the errors because the artificial intelligence software leaves a margin of error of between 1 and 10%. We formed teams to correct the small margin of error and we managed to correct completely.
Baruni keeps the manuscripts in a small conservation room. Numerous weathered books stand among ozone generators that prevent paper deterioration by stopping mold and other harmful organisms from forming. The manuscripts are cleaned and digitized. Baruni sees it as the only viable solution today for saving these old texts. Most of their manuscripts are now kept in family libraries. Every family in Jerba has these libraries, but many manuscripts have been sold or traded.
Fortunately, our grandfather had stipulated that these books were not to be inherited, sold or shared. So we kept everything. And then the founder's children and grandchildren added to the collection by buying manuscripts sold in the Jebra market.
The Ibadi Muslim community in Tunisia's Jerba is the perfect example of resilience and adaptability. By incorporating AI technology, they are not only safeguarding their rich heritage, but also ensuring that future generations can access and appreciate these historical manuscripts and bridge the gap between the past and the present.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching and goodbye.